Human obsession with true crime has been a constant fixture in media, and nowadays there is no lack of content consumption around it. Books, docuseries, podcasts, and YouTubers, as you find yourself now. But what happens when this content doesn't satiate the intrigue? This is about Murderabilia. Simply put, it's items surrounding murder, more often serial killers, and of course, the more infamous the killer, the higher the price tag, and the items of Murderabilia can range very greatly. From clothing items of the killer, art made while incarcerated, all the way to murder tools actually used to kill victims that were once crime scene evidence. And these take place from private collectors, online sales, and museums, and don't worry, we will talk about everyone's favorite ghost douche later. But as always, how the hell did we get here? To $1 million industry surrounding items of death. The term Murderabilia was coined by Andy Kahan in 1999, who has been the driving force in the education and discussion surrounding Murderabilia. It all started when Andy read an article in the paper about a New York serial killer, Arthur Shawcross, having his art privileges revoked due to the fact that his paintings were being sold on eBay. Andy, curious, went onto eBay and found far more than I think he ever bargained for. But this was just the coining of the term. The actual entity of Murderabilia takes us much further back, all the way to the 1700s and 1800s. Executions, particularly in our discussion, hangings, which were a thing of public spectacle and at times entertainment. The rope that was used for the noose became an extremely sought-after item, which resulted in the executioner themselves cutting off fragments and selling them off to the crowd. And part of this was the fact that executioners themselves were kind of like contractors and had to actually purchase the rope themselves for executions. It was a way for the executioner to get some money back and this member of the general public to have a token of a notorious execution, but more often than not, it was actually seen as a talisman for a variety of reasons, but more often than not, it was for good luck. A news article in the year 1900 even said, "This is strange to say, a very common among high-born dames. Indeed, one well-known journalist who makes a specialty investigation of crime frequently receives letters from ladies of position, who image that he can use influence with the officials, whether there is a sensational murder trial, requesting a small piece of the executioner's rope, for which considerable sums are frequently offered." Which, believe it or not, there are modern-day Murderabilia people that actually still hold this talisman ideology, but since we're now discussing old and new, there is one duo whose infamy only doubled in death, and that would be Bonnie and Clyde. Even at the scene of their death, which they were killed by a shootout with the police, people in the crowd were so determined to get a piece of the infamous outlaw duo, they ran to their car, which was now riddled in bullet holes and smoking, grabbing whatever they could. One walking away with pieces of Bonnie's now blood-soaked dress, and even crazier, a man tried to cut Clyde's ear off of his body, which, fortunately, he was stopped by police before he was able to do so. But of course, the most coveted or truly infamous piece of the two was Clyde's Ford V8, which 4 years later, in 1934, dubbed the Death Car, would be paraded around the country for the general public to get a glance at, and of course, for a price. It would pop up at fairs, markets, full-blown amusement parks for over 40 years. To say it would be a popular attraction would be an understatement. People jumped at the chance to see this car, and I think this is one of the very good pieces of evidence we can use for the whole conversation of why true crime now. There's this common thought process that this entire spur of true crime has only been happening recently with the Netflix docuseries, the slew of podcasts and YouTubers, but in fact, true crime has been a spectacle of humankind since, frankly, the beginning of speaking to each other. And on that, let's not forget the existence of lynching postcards, which are exactly what they sound like. Typically, photographs of real lynchings printed onto postcards. Typically, the photographer was one of the murderers as well, and the photo is usually accompanied with racist sayings or poems and smiling spectators in frame. People would send these to each other for upwards of 50 years until they were banned by the U.S. Postal Service in 1908, which if you're interested to know further in these, there's a very short documentary crafted in 2021 surrounding them called Lynching Postcards, A Token of a Good Day. And if this is your first time hearing about Murderabilia, I'm sure your first assumption would be that items like this would be in museums, which you're not wrong with that thought process. Items surrounding crimes, especially serial murders, would be found within museums. Like many of the first criminology museums that were typically for educational tools for people going into the field, they would contain items to create a visual history after the Austrian criminologist Hans Gross spoke on just how quick knowledge about crime becomes obsolete. These items could be as simple as handwriting samples to weapons, execution tools, and horrifyingly enough, human remains. But I think Murderabilia truly lies to private sellers and secret underground whisper networks, as frankly kinda always has, but you know, it's less of a whisper nowadays, more of a hush talk. Once this market was created, there was and is no way of controlling it. Buyers deem the value and sellers gladly oblige. From toenail clippings, used bar soap, all the way to the most undesirable DNA you can acquire. In 1994, right before his execution, serial rapist pedophile John Wayne Gacy had his lawyers put 40 of his paintings up for auction, which obviously was something that outraged the public, so much so that two men, Joe Roth and Wally Noble, went to the auction spending over $15,000 to buy the majority of the art to allow family members of the victims of John Wayne Gacy to take them right outside to a bonfire and burn them. This, of course, got a lot of praise from everyone there, and other people even brought out other Gacy artifacts to put into the fire. But unbeknownst to them, and frankly probably everybody, because why would they know this was barely scratching the surface at the amount of John Wayne Gacy paintings there were. It's unknown just how many he painted, but frankly it seems to have no end and are a staple piece of Murderabilia. I have seen too many damn John Wayne Gacy paintings to count, and that's not even for me going to morbid museums. I have gone to record shops and just seen them around, and I think in particular that Tesla anarchist TikToker Jake Weber actually himself owns 4 John Wayne Gacy paintings and is a very prolific Murderabilia collector who I believe has now deleted every video surrounding that, but that's not for us to discuss. It's estimated he made probably 2,000 paintings, and funnily enough, a lot of people reference that a prison guard who was there at the time says Gacy didn't paint the majority of these. He actually had a system running of other prisoners painting, and he would just sign off and then sell them because he was making so much money doing this, estimated about $100,000. Now, 2,000 paintings, $100,000, these are exaggerations. These are exaggerations from year after year, and now decades after decades. But to say John Wayne Gacy wasn't making money, that's not true. He was absolutely making money, and he made an insane amount of paintings that, to be fair, we can't really verify if he did or didn't, but either way, these touched John Wayne Gacy's hands, which is too gross to even matter if he painted or not. Real or forged, the value crafted by true crime junkies has done nothing but raise the cost of these, from auctions in 2011 pricing them between $2,000 to $4,000, which at this point has doubled, if not tripled, with some paintings being sold into the tens of thousands range, especially the most sought after ones, the portraits of himself as his clown alter ego, Pogo the Clown, which legendary S-tier band, I don't care what you say, Acid Bath actually used it for one of their debut studio albums. Well, the debut studio album from Acid Bath. And Pogo the Clown is something that has weirdly cemented itself into metal and alternative culture as a whole. It became pop culture in this weird, sick, twisted way. Outside of a rare auction like this held in 1984, Murderabilia wasn't an easy thing to acquire, or even really a thing of knowledge to most people. When referenced by collectors on how they would get items pre-online sale, most of it was done by phone calls and email. There were far less people interested in serial killers, and you'd have to build some sort of reputation in this underground community, and garner some level of respect on your assets and connections, typically to killers in the means of trading their items. Most of, if not all, people getting Murderabilia at this past time was the fact that they themselves were pen pals, or at least in some sort of correspondence with serial killers or inmates. Now, of course, this wasn't the only means of getting Murderabilia. Susan Atkins, one of the Manson girls herself, has actually referred to the fact that guards have taken her own items to, against her own will and consent, be sold as Murderabilia online, which Susan herself says doesn't paint her in a really awesome light, and she doesn't care for it, but as an inmate, you don't really have a choice. Frankly, lots of Murderabilia comes stolen from other inmates or guards, not even just directly from the killer themselves. But of course, we all know the cyberspace is what reigns supreme, and eBay takes us back to our boy Andy, as I discussed earlier about how we even got to this silly little word. After finding these mass amounts of listings for killer's art and various other pieces of murder tokens on eBay being disturbed, he himself reached out to their public affairs representative about the hosting of sales of these items. They then told him, quote, "You know, Andy, we're not the morality police. As long as it's legal, we have an obligation to offer it to our customers, and if you don't like it, feel free to do something about it." Which, what a sassy response from eBay. And you know what Andy did? He did something about it. Andy began to purchase such large amounts of Murderabilia himself to destroy that private sellers would contact him before listing things to give him first dibs on Murderabilia items. Now, of course, Andy did destroy most of them so they couldn't go into what he deemed the wrong hands, but as an advocate for a victims organization, he actually kept some to use for physical demonstrations. These include such mundane things as letters from Ed Kemper, prison-issued socks worn by the Toolbox Killer, all the way to the actual foot skin flakes of the Railway Killer. He himself said, "I felt it was important to have these actual items in my possession, to show that the industry actually does exist and is thriving, as opposed to simply printing out items that were being sold. It's a more powerful presentation when I pull out Charles Manson's hair that was sold in the form of a swazi." But soon enough, this actually changed, and eBay themselves deemed the ban of sales involving crimes of the past 100 years in 2001, which really, really odd and specific that they chose just 100 years. And I will say right now, as of this morning of August 4th, right? August 4th. Well, I guess it's the 3rd because I'm filming at like 3 in the morning. Whatever. I checked today. There are people selling Murderabilia on eBay. They just get around it a little bit. And frankly, not even around it that much. And I'm not going to tell you what to look for because, listen, if you're desperate enough, you're going to be able to find plenty of Murderabilia. I'm not handing it to you on a platter, okay? And this ban by eBay did nothing for the stopping of sales of Murderabilia. It just led to people making their own independent websites to sell it. One of these people that went out to make an independent site was a man named Eric Kohler, who was a correspondent with Richard Ramirez. Now, Ramirez, according to Eric, propositioned him to sell his art for him. So Eric listed about 10 pieces onto eBay, which he said sold very quickly, and he realized there was a market for this type of thing. This then encouraged him to get into more correspondence with other killers, collecting his own personal items as well as getting things to sell on eBay. He was selling them there until the ban, and that just led him to making his own independent website, Serial Killers Inc., which is now defunct. But that was just one of the now tens of sites you yourself can buy an item directly connected to murder. When I tell you the range of these items are insane, boy, are they insane. If you can think of it, it exists in a form of Murderabilia. When you start talking about this, scratching the surface is letters, artwork, boo, boring, you're serious, you want something crazy. Well, for the low cost of $28,000, you yourself can own Jeffrey Dahmer's high school trumpet, which the caption enthusiastically states his DNA might still be on it. Too rich for your blood? I completely understand you. How about a swatch of Gacy shirt for just $280, which is so damn devious because you know damn well the people that sell these scraps of fabric got an entire shirt they're really cutting and maximizing their profit on. Clothing not enough for you? You want something a little closer. Well, guess what? For even less money, you can buy a strand of Charles Manson's hair, which Charles Manson is commonly referred to as the king of Murderabilia because you could buy just about anything associated with this man, even as I just stated, parts of him. Like, there is nothing surrounding Manson that wasn't for sale and or is still for sale, even post-mortem. Artwork, ID cards, books he owned, and even a $425 bag of half-eaten Reese's Pieces. Charles Manson has painted over the entire true crime intrigue and community since the crime happened. Even the Museum of Death in LA having a room solely dedicated to the Manson family and Charlie. He is kind of this giant figure within true crime, but I think it is an interesting thing that it is all timing based. I think Charles Manson and the Manson family is something that's falling out of interest to people, I would say, in my age group and things of that nature. My reference to Charles Manson is only so strong from older people and going to certain museums, but like, if you start just typing in the word Murderabilia, Charles Manson is the first guy you're going to see anything about. It's really interesting to me to see what people garner value of and how large the value is and how different it is depending on who owned what. It truly is a market that value depends on the buyer more than anything. And there's these intriguing moral lines drawn, which you see with any really subversive thing. I've spoken about this with the gore, is people will draw lines at what they're okay with and not okay with. And that absolutely happens within Murderabilia. You won't see a lot of Murderabilia surrounding pedophiles or things involving children victims. This is where a lot of people draw the lines. Like the owner of Murder Auction, yes, that's what it's called. He himself has stated he will not sell things that involve children of killers or anything of the like, or 9/11. But he will sell things involving school shooters, like Columbine and Sandy Hook. So it's very just interesting, because certain people Their infamy outweighs the fact that they themselves were in fact pedophiles. John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez all had minor victims, but I don't think most people jump to that when they think of them. There's this level of infamy that surrounds them and makes them these fictitious boogeymen to some people that they forget that. Or even Albert Fish, the vicious pedophile cannibal serial killer who I can't even begin to scratch the surface on telling you anything about that man if this video wants to see the light of day, because he was such a deviant. That man has people walking around with full black and gray portrait tattoos of him, and he appears in Murderabilia quite often because he's just so famous. It seems like he gets this odd pass with people. But serial killers aren't the only ones who have these items. As previously mentioned in the Cannibal Deep Dive, Sagawa, the Japanese cannibal, has things such as his used chopsticks, or arm and mais of wrongly referred to Cannibal Cafe murder, which I'm not going to sit here and go through that again. Everything surrounding Armin Mize is for sale, from floppy disks in his house, boots he wore in the army, to the tiles in the bathroom where his consensual victim bled out, and even the rope used to bind him is things you can purchase for sale. You can even get his frying pan. You can get a plate, a knife, and a fork. Do we know if he cooked it? Who knows? But it's the fact that there's a chance he did. And it doesn't just center around killings, it centers around tragic incidences as well, including shootings, as I mentioned with Columbine and Sandy Hook. There's been murderabilia surrounding them. And I believe even the man I mentioned who owns Serial Killers Inc. purchased bullet fragments out of a survivor of the Batman shooting. And outside of shootings and serial killers, celebrity tragedies as well. Dimebag Darrell, things from his last show where he was murdered on stage, fetch tens of thousands of dollars when they are put up for sale. The ownership and sale of items tied to the crime's most heinous is just so prevalent. I think it would be shocking if you have never heard of something like this before. And of course, a big question surrounds this of, if all of these things are being sold for so much money, who's getting the money? And that is a far more complicated answer than I think you could ever imagine. In 1977, the commonly referred to as Son of Sam laws were put in place, named after serial killer David Berkowitz, who was offered extremely large sums of money by publishing companies to write a book about his story for them to sell. These laws were created to prevent those accused or convicted of a crime from profiting from the commercial exploitation of their crimes. This could be from the production of books, movies, magazines, shows, and the like in which their crime would be reenacted. Or even just the person's thoughts, feelings, opinions, or emotions about the crime are expressed. But these laws were actually pretty quickly overturned, unbeknownst to, I think, a lot of people, including myself. I thought the Son of Sam laws were still enacted in place. I've never heard anyone mention that they were overturned until I was researching for this video. In 1991, the Supreme Court itself said the laws were too broad and violated the First Amendment free speech. On a more new note, post these laws being overturned, and part of what Andy Kahan works for, are notary for profit laws. These have been enacted in 8 states to prevent criminals from profiting, but these do far from anything when it comes to murderabilia, because no matter what, it immediately becomes a third-party sale item. You know, Ed Kemper's not running a website from prison selling his own letters. It's someone slightly removed who is. So when you purchase, say, a letter from Ed Kemper on Serial Killers Inc., and you paid $500 for it, Ed Kemper's not seeing that money. Well, if you're buying from Serial Killers Inc., he was. The vast majority of people who sell murderabilia keep all the funds themselves. But at times, certain vendors will possibly put money on the books of those who sent them art. A moral loophole some can live with. I didn't pay for the item. They gave it to me for free, and I just put money on their books. Eric Holler, who I mentioned earlier, who runs Serial Killers Inc., he himself, though, said, I don't pay these guys outright for their items, but if these guys send me a packet of artwork and just say, hypothetically, say I make $1,000 off a criminal, I'm going to help them out. I'm going to send them some money if they're helping me pay bills. Regardless of if they deserve it or not, they're helping me out, so I'm going to help them out. So, with that, that's just one man, but it does appear to be, there is the chance that your purchase of murderabilia would immediately go to lining the pockets of a serial killer. Now, I will say this is a very big outlier. Most people do not do this, but I'm not going to ignore the fact that someone does. Contrasting this, the owner of Murder Auctions said, inmates should not be able to profit based on their notoriety, but that's not what's happening. Usually a gentleman in their 20s or 30s will write to an inmate as a woman and con them out of items and then turn around and sell them online, unbeknownst to the inmate. So he has said multiple times he agrees on the fact inmates should not be getting money, but of course he himself sees no issues with the sale of Murderabilia, which, trust me, we're going to get to the issues of Murderabilia later in the video. But believe it or not, Andy, as I've spoken, the advocate against Murderabilia and the creator of the term's biggest asset has actually been David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. When Andy began his research about Murderabilia, he reached out to multiple serial killers about the existence and sale of their items. And David was one of the 12 who responded. David not only wrote him back, but he started sending the Murderabilia salesmen straight to him. Not just Murderabilia salesmen, people who wanted to license David's likeness to use for what I can only refer to as killer merch. Particularly, someone wanted to do serial killer greeting cards and wanted to make a Son of Sam one, so David just sent it right off to Andy to deal with. And I'm not talking generic serial killer and documentaries and chill t-shirts. I'm talking full offensive victim crime scene photograph t-shirts, board games, action figures, kind of anything you could slap something on. There's probably a serial killer merch of it. But of course, let's start with clothes. Maybe Richard Ramirez Hawaiian shirts up your alley. No? How about tits for Berkowitz? No, you don't want a killer on it. Don't worry about it. How about full up-close crime scene photographs of Elizabeth Short's murder? Which I could go on for hours about the sensationalism that surrounded Elizabeth Short and the Black Dahlia and the murder and all of that, but that's neither here nor there. For the record, I'm not coming to knock the guy who owns this company, because they actually have some cool stuff on this site, and if it wasn't him, it'd be another guy, because guess what? He is just one of hundreds of, if not thousands of people creating serial killer merchandise. And I've always come to you from this point of not ignoring the hypocrisy or irony of me sitting here and condemning and saying certain things. Like, I myself have a Vlad the Impaler tattoo. I got it when I was 18. I was like, ooh, dark history, vampire, yeah, obviously. Look at me. Are we shocked by any of this? But objectively, is that not worse than a t-shirt? Vlad the Impaler killed hundreds of people in war. And of course, is a dark historical tattoo. Yes, of course it is. But you could frankly argue in a few decades that these are men of the same status in a very sick and crazy way. At the end of the day, everything can kind of come tomato, but there is definitely things that I feel like even hardcore Murderabilia people deem violently offensive. One that comes to my mind personally is the Demented dolls created by Andrew Gore, more particularly the Peekaboo doll crafted of Jeffrey Dahmer, which, you might already be like, wow, that's very gross, weird, creepy, offensive to create a plush Jeffrey Dahmer doll. Oh, it gets so much worse. Don't even worry about it, friend, because there's a working zipper crafted that you unzip, and there is a fully dismemberable doll of a black man inside, as well as he comes with a container labeled leftovers that have 3 plastic feet and a plastic genital in it. I wish I was lying to you. And presumably the doll that is inside of Dahmer is a doll that was sold separately by Andrew called Jeffrey Dahmer's Victim, which was a dismemberable doll of a black man that came with a fork and a knife. At that point, I'd rather see someone in a tasteless t-shirt. Now that we're on the topic of what's Murderabilia, what's killer merch, what's what when it comes to Murderabilia, and another part of that is what's offensive, what's not offensive, what's right, and what's a wrongful display of Murderabilia. I think that takes us quickly into the conversation surrounding museums. John Walsh, whose young son was kidnapped and murdered by a serial killer, unfortunately co-founded the Museum of Crime and Punishment in Washington, which is unfortunately now defunct. The museum had over 700 artifacts, claiming to be the largest collection of Murderabilia in the world, and was indeed a for-profit museum. It contained items like John Wayne Gacy's paint set, Ted Bundy's Volkswagen, and Ted Kaczynski's Bible. These items were contrasted with crime scene investigation education areas, like a reconstruction techniques or even the full-blown CSI experience area of a fake cadaver to investigate. As well, Zak Bagans' Haunted Museum is actually half Murderabilia, which, listen, as someone who's gone there, I don't think that's advertised nearly enough, that the fact that half of it is truly some of the most gruesome Murderabilia I've ever seen. He has Ted Bundy's ski mask, a tool he used in murder. He even has Dr. Kevorkian's entire van, which, we're not talking about if Dr. Kevorkian was bad or not. That's neither here nor there. I feel like having these types of items contrasted by, frankly, hokey, paranormal, creepy, spooky, ooky, kooky stuff is really peculiar. I think it's the same with the Crime and Punishment Museum of having these fun, interactive things in conjunction just feet away from objects of murder. And it's interesting to note that neither of these museums seemingly get backlash or criticisms for existence like museums such as the Museum of Death attracts. This could be for an array of reasons. The removal of the serious context when there's things like Wild West shootout games, or the crafting of the palatability of making interactive CSI education areas that are steps away from self-dubbed serial killer galleries, or even the fact that it has the stamp of John Walsh. Once again, easy to watch and digest true crime content. And of course, Zak Bagans, a fixture of kind of infamy and mockery in a way surrounding ghosts, People go there for ghosts, so you're gonna go past a bunch of haunted dolls or all this creepy stuff as a non-believer, a skeptic, or let's say you are even a believer, and then they slam you into the cooler room, because it's the cooler room. This is where you take your water break. You take it in the serial killer room, which is its own separate weird thing I could not fathom when I went there, and then you're just locking eyes with a painting of Charles Manson made out of his own blood. I think it is kind of a absolute disservice to the murder victims by having if you're gonna have this stuff on display like this, and just a step away they're like, this is the Dybbuk box, which the Dybbuk box is fake. I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this. The Dybbuk box isn't real. You're gonna do that and then immediately just look at essentially a Pogo the Clown uniform. It's fucking odd. Whereas the Museum of Death is just that. It's death, and it's put up with little leading other than what you're looking at. It doesn't have the direct visuals or verbal conjunction of the consequences of actions, or making it something easy to look at with interactive games and props. As well, J.D. Healy, the owner, poses an interesting defense when speaking to Rolling Stone about Murderabilia. If you think about Lincoln, he was murdered. Who has that stuff? The Smithsonian. I think people wear those blinders when they think that just serial killers and murderers. Like, that's the only Murderabilia out there. But if you really think about it, there's a lot more to Murderabilia than people think. It's an interesting way to think about it and look about it in that way is, what are we really constituting as Murderabilia? Is it just serial killing? Because that's kind of not fair in other instances like presidential executions. I think, not executions, assassinations. I think all this comes down to moral relevancy, which I think is something that comes down to everything with people, and especially macabre topics like we speak on here. Someone can deem the Museum of Death as the offensive party for having things such as the Dahmer doll or crime scene photos without the name or context of the victims, whereas someone else can deem the Crime and Punishment Museum the offensive party for having these exhibits of playing fake Western shootouts with toy guns just feet from victims and real weapons used in violent murders. Everything is all about context and what sits right and wrong with you. I think how and why something is being presented is always what matters. Most memorabilia, being such a broad term, does in definition include items seen in the Smithsonian, the Met, international medical museums of historical pieces, just as much as it includes a guy buying a Gacy painting to put in his living room. The word murderabilia and death itself is an enigma, and it is something that is so complex and can never just be stamped out as one thing or another. And I don't think anything in this world can ever be one thing or the other. We don't live in a black and white world. There is no immediately good and immediately bad. I think especially when it comes to murderabilia and true crime, context is everything. Why are you showing this to me? How are you showing this to me? And frankly, a lot of times, what are you showing to me? Do we really need to go to Zak Bagans' museum and see the ski mask and tool Ted Bundy used to murder women. But I also don't think we need a million dudes in basements with handfuls of letters from Dennis Rader. And of course, that $1 million question. Why? Why do people want Murderabilia? There's a mass variety of reasons as always, but putting us back into the beginning of our conversation on tokens or talisman, Scott Bond, a professor on criminology, credits the talisman effect saying, as a society, we tend to transform these individuals, like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, into larger-than-life gothic monsters. They're almost supernatural in a way. By holding or having these things, it gets us closer to this dark evil force that some people are very attracted to. It's a way to expose yourself to evil and danger without actually having to do it. You're just collecting it or holding it, as opposed to engaging or encountering with Jeffrey Dahmer or someone like that. The most commonly referred to reason is history preservation, as just touched on about dudes with handfuls of Dennis Rader letters and of the like. I think it's bullshit. I do. There's enough museums and private collectors that I don't think we need things still for sale. I don't think this is something that just needs to be into anyone's hands that has enough money to purchase it. You can come up with whatever insane hypotheticals you want about how someone may actually need this, about a poorly written pen pal letter or a shitty pencil drawing. Another excuse is to understand the killer, know their psyche. I'm sorry, are you an art therapist? Which, that's its own thing. But again, what are you gaining? What understanding of their psyche do you get by owning their toenail clippings? I just think, arguably, I think this one's worse. At least the preservation guys, I'm like, okay, sure. If you have this insane hypothetical that every museum who has anything involving BTK, Richard Ramirez, Ted Bundy, is just somehow gonna blow up, and you are the one guy who has a crappy boob drawing from like Arthur Shawcross in your desk, and you're like, I still have a piece of him, so we remember. I'll take that over someone trying to argue with me. They're gonna understand a serial killer's psyche and mind as someone who had $5,000 and access to the internet. Okay, I don't know if you could tell, but I don't own Murderabilia. I don't want to own Murderabilia. I do know people that own Murderabilia, and I've discussed it at length with them. And you know why? Because they're honest about it. The people that own Murderabilia because they want to. That's it. It is as close and as highest point as they can get into whatever dark intrigue or fascination they have. And that's it. That's what it is. If you own it, it's because you want to. I think a lot of this is the focus on mixed signals sent by the culture around it. It's a matter of fact that serial killing is bad, but so many at the same time deem it absolutely fascinating, quickly giving it mass attention and fixation, a celebrity-esque status. It crafts this vitality around an inanimate object. Holding a comb belonging to Richard Ramirez draws out awe, fear, fascination. It sets itself apart from every other comb they've ever held. This wasn't just a comb. This was the comb of a serial killer. It crafts an energy. Once they've had the knowledge of its history, as without its infamous owner, it'd just be another random piece of plastic. They've created life into these mundane items to collectors. It shows the attraction to crossing set or restrictive boundaries put in place societally. It's also a part of dancing the line of life and death, and good and evil, getting as close as you can to someone deemed deadly, dangerous, and indulging in an ultimate taboo. At the end of the day, it's clear who wins and loses with Murderabilia. The winners are the third-party sellers making thousands of dollars. It's serial killers that love that their notoriety is going nowhere. And the ones taking the loss are the friends and families of victims. As it stands, Murderabilia is going nowhere, as sensationalism and publicity surrounding serial murder is a human fixation that will never go away. The craving for knowledge of darkness and those who commit acts against man will never satiate, and the pop culture conversion of serial killers will never fade. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Now, have you heard of Murderabilia before? Is this the first time you're hearing about this? This video topic was actually chosen by the members of the channel. Members of the channel will get to help pick what topics we talk about on here, so if you want to be a member, make sure to join. The link is down below. They also get early access to videos. As I mentioned, Murderabilia is not my thing. I know for a fact I have people that watch me that own Murderabilia, so if you'd like to share your thought process on why you own it, collect it, want it, please let me know down below. I love reading the comments and seeing people's opinions about everything I talk about on here. As always, thank you everybody for liking, commenting, and subscribing. Make sure you do all three. 60% of people that watch my videos are not subscribed, and I want to hit 100K. God damn it, so subscribe. And of course, the best thing you can do to help me is to share my videos. So if you share my videos, it means the world. Also, thank you to everyone that is buying merchandise. I know I say this every video because guess what? You guys buy merch all the time, almost every day of the week, and I appreciate it. It is one of the best ways to support me. Also, here are my nails. As always, go follow my nail girl, Claws by Joy. Shout out Joy. And once again, thanks for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. If you like this video, oh boy, maybe you'd like my video about the brief history of taxidermy. I don't know. Either way, have a good one. I'll see you later.